So what's been pointed to here is wholeness, is oneness. Advaita or non-duality means not two. It's implying that everything is one thing, one movement, one energy expressing itself. But what seems to happen in the human being, which hasn't happened in the animals and very young children, and some people, older people with Alzheimer's as well, and there are some humans which it hasn't happened in, but I think a lot of them are ones with learning disabilities or maybe autism or Asperger's. But most human beings, what happens around a young age, maybe 2 or 3, here it didn't happen till later. This body-mind mechanism had quite severe learning difficulties, so it didn't actually happen until maybe about 6 or 7, and I remember it happening. This personal energy, this divide happened. So suddenly all there was, so before there was just what is, there was just life happening. And then there came a point where suddenly life was happening to a me, separate from life, and I was an individual. And I remember that break happening. Schools and the education system were very insistent that I spoke. I didn't speak till late, and that I communicated and wrote and understood language. And before that, there was this freedom, and every time the school system kept trying to make me speak and make me think, it felt like I was being put in a cage. And so there was a moving away from that, but eventually it began to happen, and it felt like there was boundlessness, and then suddenly there was this caged energy. I was something in time, and I remember it very specifically, particularly because it happened later. It normally happens 2 or 3. But because of the learning difficulties, it didn't happen till later on. I remember that moment of comprehending my name and seeing my name written down. Before that, it was just namelessness. The body was responding to a name, but it wasn't mine. And then suddenly it became my name, and I was somebody in here, separate from my mum, my dad, the road I was walking on, the car, the dogs, the trees. Before that, there was just boundlessness. There was no sense of being divided in words, being divided in language. And I think that it is language that divides us, but it becomes an energetical thing. Without language, without this complicated thinking, so in animals and young children, it doesn't happen. It only happens with this complicated thinking of language. But it's not a wrong thing. Language is something that happens, and complicated thinking is something that happens in the human being, but it becomes a whole story of a person, and it becomes who you are, rather than before the language started there was just what is. It becomes you are a story in language, in time. You are descriptions of your good actions, your bad actions. Without language, that doesn't exist. You are your past events, what you've done. You're your future events. You're what you own. This is impossible to form without language, but it becomes so strong. It's like an energy. This language becomes so true. It becomes like an energetic feeling in the body. So it almost feels like it's beyond language. It feels like who you are. It feels like you are someone in there. And so thoughts become realities. Ideas become reality, seemingly. It's so believable that you are someone, and that person over there is another person, and they're a good person, and they're a bad person, and they're an asshole, and they're higher than you, they're lower than you. They're the person you bonked 3 months ago. The language becomes reality. And again, complicated thinking is another part of expression but it's not who you are. It's just complicated thinking. And the suffering came, the divide came, when it became who you were. You became somebody in time. Rather than time just appearing in this boundlessness, you became somebody in time, and it always feels like you're journeying in time, that you're here because of time, that you were born and you're here because of 30 years of life or 40 years of life. And that you're off somewhere, you're going to go and do this with your life or that with your life or blah, 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 blah. And that's the illusion. Time and language is something that arises in this boundlessness that was here at birth of the body. It was even there before birth, but we'll just start with the body. It was there when you were good, bad, right, wrong, when you told yourself you were a Buddhist, or you told yourself you were an arsehole, or you told yourself you were the queen, or a beautiful person or an ugly person, a skinny person, a fat person, a right person, a wrong person, a better person, a lesser person, a married person, an unmarried person. This boundlessness was there no matter what story arose. But the story is always changing and not who you are. It comes and goes in this absolute freedom. And so not these talks and non-duality are pointing back to this freedom. And it's not pointing to the end of conceptual thinking. It's pointing to the end of that energy that's claiming the conceptual thinking, that's saying, I am the conceptual thinking. I am found in a story. That energy of personal. And it is like an energetic contraction. It feels like you end at the end of your body, which is an absolute lie. Aliveness is everything. Energy is everything. Beingness is everything. And know one thing, it's not limited to one thing. And it's absolute mysterious and doesn't make any sense at all, and can't ever be put into concepts, even though these concepts are trying to point to it, because it's beyond language. Language appears in it. Aliveness isn't the source of language. Beingness. And it's the most beautiful subject. It's so beautiful. But it can seemingly be a very uncomfortable subject because it's talking about the end of you, who you think you are. And it's completely challenging the idea of choice, free will, yours, identity. So it can be very uncomfortable, this subject. But it's so beautiful. It's saying that everything is it. Everything is that beingness, that aliveness. It's the nature of everything. It's not something that you, the person, needs to get. It is. What you looked for is always been this. Because the me, when this identity starts, it always it comes with a certain amount of discomfort, feeling limited and vulnerable to the body. So it's always looking for comfort, for home. So it looks in sex, in money, in others, in power, in perfect place to live, the perfect car, perfect partner, the perfect children. And it's never been in any of it. The shoes, the tops, they're nice things, but it's never been in any of it. It's what's happening. It's the nature of aliveness that's looked for, never the objects. And what suffering there's been about trying to obtain objects and trying to get things, trying to be somebody and be something. And non-duality points back to the freedom that's always been here. The nature of everything. It's pointing to a freedom that's not bound in anything. You cannot buy it, you cannot get it. It is. Love is what sought, seeked for is. But that energy that's looking for this thing that it feels like it's lost can feel very uncomfortable hearing this, because it's wanting to find it. It's wanting to. It's always on the run. Okay, well that's the end of the introduction.